Tutor of History was my first novel. I had put a lot of energy working with Penguin India at that time and the editor Ravi Singh on editing the text. So all of our energies had been spent on that. I had never given a single thought to the cover. And it never occurred to me that I would be involved at all in making a decision about the cover. But then when they came around to designing the cover and they started to propose photos, I had a very strong feeling that I wanted art instead of photos, because I had an affinity for art that I didn't have for photos. But at that time, Penguin was really favoring photos because they felt that other kinds of paintings and drawings were too traditional. They wanted to have a very modern look. I insisted that there not be any mountains. I did not want any exotica. I didn't want any temples. I really wanted like a modern, gritty picture. Every photo they proposed was like beautiful, and I just didn't want that. So I was quite desperate. Then they came up with the idea of like, why don't you approach Nepali photographers that you know? Finally, Usha Tiwari, who now goes by the name Usha Titikchu, she was a photojournalist and she took sort of socially, politically charged photos. And so, I was looking at her photos and found this one that, had nothing except for what looked like dead or dying plants in the foreground and a gray sky in the black and white photo. So I know for a fact that my editors were not happy. They didn't love it. But by that time, the deadline was nearing. And for me, that was the best option. A few years later, I was with a friend, a poet, Wayne Amsis, who also spent a lot of time, particularly in the 1990s, doing street photography in Kathmandu, black and white. And there was this one photo that I was just looking and, it sort of struck me that, this guy was the tutor of history. Both Wayne and I were like, oh my God, that is the tutor of history. That is him. This is the man I wrote about. Usually publishing houses are quite open to changing the cover when there's a new edition. Penguin was very happy to change the photo in the new edition. So that was the second cover, which I absolutely love. The whole series of photos that Wayne Amsis took, I think I bought this one from him. I bought another one, which was when Madan Bhandari was killed. And people were reading the news on the streets, like just reading the newspapers. And there was like such shock in their faces and such sort of urgency. That was just like, it captured an era, of Nepali political life. It was strange and it wasn't something at that time, I wasn't really looking for a cover for it. Third cover is when Aleph bought the rights to all of my entire oeuvre. So like all of the fiction books, all of the nonfiction books, and they wanted to come up with a unified look for all of my books. The designer is Nikhil Afale. I really loved that unified look. I loved going to art again. So what I really enjoyed was that first loyalty that Penguin had to using photos, which I was so uncomfortable with. I had actually then, after the Tutor of History, got really comfortable with it and really into that idea. And, in my later books, I really cultivated Nepali photographers. I was like, please give me your photos. And then Aleph was like, no, we do art. We don't do photos. I was like, okay. I used to originally like art. So I really liked that they went to art, and I love the graphic. It was like my original concept of what I would have wanted for a cover sort of came into being with the third edition that Aleph published. I just remember very early on when the novel was first being published in 2001, talking to Ravi Singh about this, I was like, no Himalayas, no exotica, no temples, no Swayambhu, no, never. And I've never had that except in a couple of translations where, European translations and stuff, where they need something recognizably Nepali. And so it's always like the Swayambhu, it's always the mountains. It's always like these sort of stereotypical images of Nepal, which have nothing to do with anything I've ever written. This is my favorite. I love this man. This is the Tutor of History. That is absolutely my favorite, but I don't think I will ever have that feeling. So of seeing a photograph of a stranger and saying, that is the man whose story I wrote. I mean, that was it was so strange and so serendipitous that I feel like that's the kind of thing that never happens, really. It's not going to be a process I ever count on in the future.